Are you able to see my screen? Excellent. So what we're going to take a look at here to start is, of course, an example of the self-service portal. This might look slightly different from what you have currently configured in your environment, but this is just a general layout for how we would provide the end user with that one-stop shop, that single pane of glass for all their service delivery needs. And I know that the core use case for TOPdesk currently is on the IT side. However, as we've probably discussed before, our tool is a true enterprise service management solution, meaning that any number of different departments can take value from the tool in the sense that if they are answering questions, receiving service requests, or even just part of your approvals processes, they can have representation on the portal as well as their own processes on the back end of the tool to help support the way that those teams work. And I'd be happy to help with any additional teams or considerations that you have in the back of your mind for how those teams may be able to get some benefit at the TOPdesk, because we've really found that with a lot of customers, the more teams that onboard onto TOPdesk, of course, it does mean a little bit more upkeep. However, it does centralize information, make the reporting side of the tool a little bit more consistent for all those different teams, as well as providing options for all those teams to have a little bit of control over not only their change management processes, but also how they receive requests from users and how they communicate with other departments. I'll speak to a couple of examples of that here, but where I'd like to start is just a quick example of us going in and logging a ticket in TOPdesk. As a user, our whole goal is to make sure that the process of logging a new request is simple, easy to understand. In my environment, I just have that configured as a single form. It's just something easy for the user to understand, integrating directly with our Active Directory for pulling in our contact information for the user, having our custom predefined questions that we're asking inside of the form to make sure we're gathering all the information we need from that user as soon as we're requesting it from them, so we're not having to do a lot of back and forth. And then, of course, having options for things like dependencies inside of these forms, or even assisting with the assignment or how we are going to actually be routing this ticket or request based on what the user provides. I'll show an example of that again when we're looking at building one of the forms. But again, the goal is that once the user fills out this form the first time and hits submit, that ticket is logged. And then they also have the ability to share that request with another user. If you're integrating with your Active Directory and you have a user that submits a request, they can tag another person. That person will receive the updates on the ticket, as well as a notification when things are updated, or, for example, when the ticket is closed out. Then, of course, the user has the option to see those requests on the portal as well. So, hey, I've logged a ticket. In this case, John didn't give us a whole lot, but of course, we could make any of those fields mandatory. He gets a little bit of an idea as to where this is at based on your process. So, hey, what status is this in? Has it been assigned to a specific operator? And then, of course, a due date, which can be based on not only just a date that you set for the ticket based on the categories and subcategories, but as well as the option to have hard set SLAs in TOPdesk. That SLA process is typically tied to another module in TOPdesk that we like to call our contract and SLA module. And I don't believe that's currently in use with either of the colleges we're talking about today, but it is an option that could be added onto your contract if it's not already a part of the packages you're included in. And then outside of a typical break fix scenario or a question, the way that we would use incident management in TOPdesk, we can, of course, use the portal to help with other tasks and requests. So in this case, I'm going to take a look at a change request in TOPdesk. So in this case, I'm going to use a simple employee onboarding process as an example. And what we've done here essentially is created a form for our new employee onboardings. It is only accessible on the portal by manager level members of our team. So for example, John is our CEO in this case. And in this scenario, John has the ability to fill out the majority of these fields, answer all the questions we need to bring a new member of our team on board, as well as options for even checking boxes for the types of assets that they need to receive when they are brought onto the team. Any of the fields, again, can be made mandatory. And then when we hit submit, in this case, instead of creating a ticket, we are, of course, creating a change request and starting a change workflow or based on one of those change templates in TOPdesk. take a little bit of a deeper dive into the change management process on the back end of the tool. But this is just to show the capability and the flexibility of some of the fields that you can see once you're actually building these forms out in the tool. Another piece to TOPdesk that I wanted to highlight while we're here is the ability for you to do reservations in the tool. So for any groups or teams that manage, say, classrooms, meeting spaces, I've even seen people use this for reserving things like company vehicles, or in the cases of some of the other education customers I have, reserving things like a golf cart if you're going to be going out onto, say, fields or any of the wide open spaces out on the campus. And the way that this would work in TOPdesk is the option to just have something as simple as the ability to say, hey, I need to reserve a meeting room for a certain period of time. Let's take a look at a calendar, a number of the rooms that we have available, and then being able to make a selection, reserve a specific room or space, helps if it's the current date. And then being able to do things like reserving services, as well as any, and when I say services, I mean catering services, getting access to projectors, monitor screens, anything that's going to be necessary for you to conduct a meeting, a class, or any other type of request in the tool. And then, of course, the option to have any part of your approvals processes as part of change management routed to a specific operator or even an end user. In this case, John, he's our CEO. He's the person who's the most important person in our environment, and he is actually going to be a part of our approvals. He doesn't actually work in TOPdesk. So he can receive all the requests that he needs to for approval through the self-service portal. He can see a little bit of information as to how many approval steps are there in this process, what is he actually being asked to approve, as well as the option to ask questions, send back notes, attach files if there need to be signatures made to, say, documentation. And then if he needs to approve or reject the request, it's as simple as a single button click. We also have options for things like broad service disruptions. So, hey, I have something that's affecting a large portion of the organization. It might be something that could be campus-wide, in which case we'd want to be able to provide some of that broad communication in the form of a broad service disruption. The way this would be created is essentially from an incident that could be made into a major incident and then posted to the self-service portal as one of these broad service disruptions, so users get an understanding of what's going on, but also the option to mark themselves as being affected so that they get included on future communication around this incident, updates as to when things are being resolved, as well as a notification at the end when things have been fixed, everything's back to normal. And in this case, of course, if their email server wasn't working, then they would be getting an email and they'd know things are fine.
Okay.
And then last, yes.
Sorry, before we get a little bit further, there's a question that popped up in the chat about the employee commencement form.
Yes.
Kenneth asked if we listed that within that form, there's confidential information in some of those field names. So how is that data secured?
That's a great question. It really is going to be based off of a couple of different processes. So typically what I'd say when it comes to, hey, we have a piece of confidential information that doesn't need to be seen by other individuals. If those are included, what we typically say is that if you are routing those requests to a specific team that has access to that information, we can lock it down so that they are the only ones seeing, say, that request. The only exception to that rule that I typically see in TOPdesk is that if a person who is your main system administrator, the person who is in charge of your instance, they would likely still be able to access that information, but typically what we recommend there is that it's a bit more of a process issue, where if the process is that that person does not access those requests, that is typically how we would recommend it. But as of right now, there's not really a way for us to completely lock down specific fields inside of those forms outside of, say, the entire request only being accessible by one team or service member.
And since it's web-based, is there security that's attached to it as it's sending the information to different places?
Yes, so it is secure while it's in transit and at rest. It's just the people who actually work in your environment have access to the admin side of the tool would still have access since they've been given security clearance on your end. Any other questions? I will take silence to no and keep moving on. The last really quick thing I wanted to mention in TOPdesk is, of course, maintaining a knowledge base. Now, inside of my environment, the example that I'll typically show is just this page, a breakdown of, hey, we have knowledge items in the tool broken out by the area of interest that they're related to, things like workspace, our accounts and access, office facilities. But another piece to the knowledge base that I will mention is that we are in the process of updating both the UI and some of the function inside of knowledge management. We've already put out a little bit of information in the form of a webinar about that upgrade to the knowledge management piece. And if you haven't already seen that, I'd be happy to provide some resources after the fact to just talk about how we're helping to make it easier to maintain and organize some of that knowledge, because we know that sometimes the long lists of knowledge items can get a little overwhelming. And then finally, the simplest and most upfront piece that I always like to show is just the option to have the search in the tool. And of course, being able to quickly find what you're looking for as a user is paramount. It's the most important thing that they're going to care about when they're in the tool, is getting to the information as quickly as possible. The one thing I always like to just speak about briefly when we're talking about just searching for items in TOPdesk is that we really have a big belief in shift left, a bit of a service mentality of, hey, we understand that users are going to ask for a lot of requests, but it does take up a lot of our time when it things that a user could solve on their own, and trying to find ways to help to provide users options for self-service, being able to answer a lot of their own questions is really what we want to support. And I'd be happy to provide some additional documentation after this call that helps to speak to that, as well as some recommendations through consultancy that we can take a look at when we do those focus sessions to maybe help with offloading some of those, again, not necessarily menial tasks, but one that do take up a lot of time, but not a lot of effort and could be pushed to end users.
Paige, we have another question. Jason asked if
course.
those knowledge items can be published to non-authenticated users.
Yes, we do have the option for you to be able to share those knowledge items externally. It's essentially just done through a link, and that is something that we could help you to configure. I believe we may also have some internal knowledge items on how to make that available as well. The last thing I wanted to mention too is that for any use cases that you, I've had several last things I'd like to say, but what I'd like to mention is that for any types of requests that you have that maybe you need an option for someone who is not an authenticated user, is not logging into the user portal on TOPdesk, we do have the option for public-facing forms. So the option to create a form, host it on a website. It could even just be the campus website. That could be customized. As soon as the user fills out that form, it could pass it along as a ticket request. And all they would need to do is include some contact information, and they would be entering into the same queues that the rest of your tickets are. Just another option to help support users that may not have a login or need to have a full login or be an operator, or sorry, not an operator, an end user in your environment. From here, I'd love to maybe hop over to the operator side of the tool while we have the time to take a look at a few of the operator views for some of the modules that we've briefly talked about so far. But first, I'm going to come to my home page in TOPdesk. Here, I, of course, have my customizable dashboards, the ability to create reports for KPIs, an overview of, in this case, major tickets, as well as the tasks and activities that need to be completed in a given day. Of course, these overviews can be customized based on an operator by operator basis. So, for example, if Kevin and Jason needed to have completely different overviews based on their roles, they could customize those overviews to be representative of the way that they work. How do I have this field, these different fields organized? Does having the main page link at the bottom really help me? In that case, they can make that happen. But more importantly, we have the option to have this quick links toolbar in the left-hand side, which I always recommend for any situation where I have to access this page hundreds of times over the course of a week or at least multiple times a day. Just having some quick access to those whenever you need them is always very helpful, as well as the option to create some custom links to different pages in the tool. And one use case that I always like to highlight is an example of what we like to call quick tickets. So for example, if I were a technician, I have a type of request that I see every day, all the time. It's something that just comes up and I don't actually have to do any work for the end user. I just need to give them an answer to the question or tell them what our standard process is. In that case, I could create one of these quick tickets. It has a predefined message that's going to send. In this case, it's just the notes. In this case, it's a printer jam, something very simple, a basic response. It's already categorized, set with a due date, as well as we can also set it to have the processing information included as well. All I have to do in this case is give this ticket the name of the caller. So in this case, I'll say it's just Dennis. Fill in the rest of the fields that are necessary or mandatory in this case. When, again, and most of these could be automatically populated. And then by hitting save, I've logged my ticket, and with maybe 2 clicks total, I've answered the question. I can move on. It's in the queue if I need to come back and do any other additional work, but now I know that things have been done. I don't have to spend a lot of time typing that request, that answer out 12 or 20 times in a week. And I think I may have seen another couple of questions come into the chat, or am I seeing some old requests?
I think those are just the ones we've already addressed.
Perfect. Sorry, trying to access the chat is a little tricky on my end while sharing my screen. So Tracy, I really appreciate the help with calling those out as they come up. While we're already here in this ticket, there are a couple of other things that I'd like to highlight, just as a couple of examples. Of course, we just saw an example of an email notification being sent out as part of a ticket response. So, hey, we've logged this ticket. We've either moved it to a new status, or in this case, just opened it and added it to the queue. The user is going to get an update to say, hey, we received this request. We understand what's going on. In this case, we've already given them an answer that's been automated based on a preloaded template, as well as contact information for how they can be responded back to. And then, of course, as long as they don't change the unique identifier here in the subject line, we can pull back any additional email communication they send along back to the body of the ticket. But one thing I always like to show here is that in addition to having that preloaded message here for these quick tickets, we also have the option to have some preloaded or default text added into the ticket. So these can be some preloaded options that you have as an operator for if you have a common way that you like to respond to a ticket. You have something that you'll either say as a response, provide your contact information, or anything along those lines that you just want to be able to say, hey, I just want to be able to click this and add the text instead of having to type it all out. And then, of course, we also have the option for what we like to call our standard solutions. And in this case, I have a couple of different standard solutions that are popping up based off of some keywords that are here in the body of our ticket. And in this case, I'm just going to show an example. This knowledge item doesn't exactly answer this question, but it does show the ability for us to just automatically populate a knowledge item with the information to answer this question, and then, of course, save it and send it along to the end user.
Paige, we have another, Harrison posted a question that.
Of course.
So those text stamps don't have any formatting, but in a lot of use cases, formatting would be helpful directly from the stamp. Is that something that's possible or upcoming?
It's a great question. When you're talking about formatting, are we just talking about the way that the text is laid out on the page, or is it just just curious exactly what you mean there?
Yeah, I'm talking about, can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. Bold, underline. I know that in the note, you can put like different heading sizes, like hyperlinking. And there are some kind of repetitive things that we do where that would be helpful. So I just kind of have to do it manually after the stamp goes in.
Gotcha. That's a great question. I'm not entirely sure on my end if it's possible now or if it's coming down the line, but it's something I could take a note on for our consultancy team, if that'd be okay.
Sure, that'd be great.
Thank you. Appreciate the question. And while we're looking at this ticket, there's also, of course, the option for us to take this ticket request and use it in a few different ways. Of course, the first would be for us to create a request for change if this is actually part of a templated workflow process we already have pre-existing, in which case all I would need to do is reference a template inside of change management for starting off this change request. I would choose my template, apply that, ensure that, of course, the categories and subcategories for this request are correct, and then create a change, and it would roll into a change process as opposed to logging as a ticket. The same thing is also true for things like creating operational activities in our operations management tool for those preventative maintenance or recurring tasks, or even creating knowledge items directly from tickets. I know customers typically use this functionality quite a bit as they're building out a knowledge base in TOPdesk, but I always just like to show it as a bit of a refresher to just to remind that if there is ever a moment where you feel like you're answering the same ticket over and over again, you really feel like a standardized or boxed response with a little bit of format, additional formatting, images, maybe even links to some of the other knowledge items you have in the tool, just an option to be able to help with building out that knowledge base and making it more robust and usable for both your end users and your operators. And then, of course, the option for us to create escalation paths. Hey, in this case, this is a very basic example, but if I were to say that this ticket was actually related to not only the IT department, but a very focused team or specific type of request that you have someone that's a bit of a specialist in, we can create some reasons as to why you would escalate a ticket, create those escalation paths, understand if they need to be assigned to specific people, and then inside of our what we'd like to call second line tickets, we have the option to create essentially sub-tickets or subtasks. One example I could show here is I use this example for another educational organization, a school district, where they have student disciplinary requests. And part of that is having sub-tickets or partial tickets, basically lists of tasks that get assigned out to others. And we can actually create some templates for those types of requests that we know we're going to have subtasks and sub-requests as part of them. And we can build that into a bit of a standardized ticket so that all you have to do is create the request and then define some of those tasks that need to be assigned out to other team members. And then the other thing I'll mention while we're here looking at this ticket is just a bit of a reminder in the sense that inside of TOPdesk, a lot of these fields you're seeing here are standard. However, there are options for 2 free custom fields or selections of different subfields you can add. So for example, you could have an area, in my case, I don't have many of these configured in my environment, but just the option to be able to have additional questions, data points that you need to collect, and then being able to pull those out of reporting. If there's something that's not being covered by the standard fields that you see in TOPdesk. But once we have a ticket in place, what I'd like to talk a little bit more about is some of the ways that we're able to encourage users to send us tickets through TOPdesk as opposed to, say, trying to email people directly, or give people phone calls, stop into people's offices. And one of the ways we always start with that is through the process of building custom forms. So of course, inside of my self-service portal designer, I won't go through the full process of, say, building out a custom form, because I can imagine that's something that the team is likely familiar with. But one of the things I always like to show is that much like what we had seen on John's portal, which is a bit of what you're going to see here, we also have the option for you to have multiple different service portal designs based off of someone's role, or maybe just different portals for, say, specific teams inside of TOPdesk. So for in this case, I could have a portal with an overview that looks something along these lines, or I can have something that's very different. In this case, this one just has a different banner image, but we could also have some that are very, very basic, only have a few fields. Or the option to, of course, make these fields or these tabs only accessible by certain users. So in this case, if I wanted to say that everyone has access to placing requests around their workspace, I can make that available to everyone, or I could lock that down so that only a specific team or even a certain number of individuals has access to those different types of requests inside of the self-service portal. Just allow a little bit of flexibility if you ever run into situations where people are making requests for things that they shouldn't have access to in the first place. We can lock that down so they only can actually make requests for the types of requests that they should be allowed to. And then, of course, in addition to having those custom forms in TOPdesk where you can go in, define the questions you need to ask every single time a ticket's coming in, as well as collecting that person's contact information, we can also allow for email integration within TOPdesk so that as people send you tickets through email, they're imported into TOPdesk. We can capture keywords in those tickets to be able to help with things like routing and categorization. And the one thing I always like to show here, just as an example, because I know that there are several customers I've worked with who weren't aware of this function, is that in addition to some of the defined text fields, the questions we ask, we can also provide options to help with the user giving us things like the category, subcategory, as well as things like the ticket type. So in this case, if I wanted to allow the user to maybe make some distinctions as to which team is this going to, what's our urgency, what's the impact of this ticket? I know a lot of times they're not going to have the maybe the specific language that you use on your team, but just having the option to let them determine if something is, say, a high priority request, if it truly is high priority, or the option to, say, choose a specific ticket type if they are able to navigate that language is an option there. The use case I see most often is that if there are forms that maybe this request could go to multiple different teams based on what it's being asked for, I can choose, make a selection. You'll see that it actually is going to affect the processing for the ticket as opposed to, say, setting this for a specific form, defining the questions, and then it's routed the same way every time. You can put a little bit of flexibility on it so that users have a little control over where the ticket goes after the fact. And in the process of creating these custom forms, this is also where you'd be able to publish these as, for example, one of those public facing forms so that I could have this just hosted on a random web page somewhere on our website. Someone fills out the form, collects all the information we need for the ticket, and then passes that along as a request inside the TOPdesk.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Of course.
I'm having some trouble seeing some of the elements. I've tried zooming in on my end. I don't know if you can make it a little larger.
Of course. Let me see if I can just zoom in a little bit and see if it helps. Is that a little bit better?
A lot better, thank you.
No problem.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, I thank you for letting me know. So now that we've talked a little bit about ticketing, typically what I'd like to do as far as a bit of a pivot from here is to talk a little bit about change management. Now, change management in and of itself inside of TOPdesk is a little bit outside of what I'd usually like to say is the textbook definition of ITIL change management processes. So in addition to things like traditional IT control changes, we can also run any kind of standardized workflow process through change management in TOPdesk. So anything that has a set number of steps, approvals processes, tasks that need to be assigned out to different team members. And the way that we typically do that in TOPdesk, as you're probably aware, is through templates. And within those templates, we can define a number of different processes. I have a ton of these built out for different requests that customers have made to me. I'm happy to help with as we move through those evaluation meetings that we're going to hopefully set up soon, understanding any ways that you are currently using change management and some ways that we might be able to expand the usage of that portion of the tool, because I see a lot of customers getting a lot of value out of working in change management for even very, very simple processes like key requests or access to certain pieces of hardware. For today's purposes, I'm going to focus on two examples here. One is going to be the follow-up to that employee onboarding example I showed where we are bringing a new person onto the team. And the other is going to be a bit more of a traditional IT control request. So I'm going to go in and take a look at, inside of change management, what our process is. So what we're looking at here, for anyone who's not familiar, is an example of building out the template or the workflow for a change. First step here is going to be, of course, describing what the nature of the change is, maybe categorizing it based on things like being a standard, non-standard, or emergency change. I also have customers that will use change management as a bit of a project management tool. Essentially, if there are any projects that you work on that are, again, those multi-step, maybe sometimes standardized processes, especially if you have a say a procurement process, or you go through a systematic review anytime you want to maybe purchase or add on a new piece of software or another tool. We can build out those processes so that any reviews, meetings, implementation requests, demos, any of those types of tasks are included as part of that workflow or that process. Set some planning information for things like impact and urgency. How quickly does this need to be addressed? How important is it to us based on the people that it is going to affect? And then, of course, an option for a preliminary request for change. So a approval that needs to be made before any steps are taken out with the change. In this case, Fred, who's our HR manager, is going to get a request to approve this onboarding. We have a little bit of an idea as to what the request is related to. We're just giving this a title so people who are working in the tool for the first time or adjusting this process know what's included or what this is related to. And then, of course, we would define activities. These activities are what is actually being conducted as part of the change. In this case, we're setting up a PC for this person, creating an access pass. But more importantly, I can see how many different departments are involved in this process. This employee onboarding is a change that is really focused on not only making sure that when employees come on board, they're having a good experience, they understand what's expected of them, what they need, and they're getting the resources they're going to need to be brought onto the team, but also understanding how our team is going to collaborate to make that happen. In this case, IT services is going to do a lot of work to set them up with, say, a laptop, the accounts they need to access, but also things like our facilities team is going to need to get them a desk, a place to work, an understanding of where they're going to be living in the organization, as well as our human resources team, who's going to be the one kicking off the request to do things like setting up their onboarding paperwork, informing the rest of the other teams in the work about the new person that's joining. And then I always like to show this planning overview just as an example of all of those different tasks broken out by department, as well as being able to follow these dependency lines here for each of these tasks to see how they're related to one another. So in this case, HR starts the process after that initial approval is made by Fred. And then once they make that personnel file, it kicks off several other tasks for the next people in line to complete, in this case, facilities and IT. And we could follow that process all the way through to the end of the change. In this case, it's just explaining to the new hire what they've been given and making sure that they understand what's needed before they go off and start their actual, say, first week at work. And while we're looking at this template, one thing I also wanted to mention is that in the same way that incident management has those custom fields, we also have an option to add a custom field inside of change management. In my example, I've created one for things like risk. Is there a tiered system that we use for evaluating how much of a risk it is to make a change to a certain system or to a certain portion of a system that we're working in, and being able to report on that as well, so we understand if we have a lot of changes that are quote unquote risky for us, we might want to start to evaluate how we're making decisions. And then, of course, any number of these different tasks can be given specific due dates, an amount of time that they have to get the task done. And anytime one of these tasks comes up as part of the workflow process, say someone in HR completes this creation of the personnel file task and it goes off to inventory services. In that case, the team that's responsible for that task is going to get a notification. It's going to enter into their work queue, and we'll take a look at a couple of places they could see that information. And then, of course, be given a due date based on when this needs to be done, in reference to the rest of the different activities in the change. So here we could see that most of the work, we only have a couple of days to get them an access pass or ship it in a mailbox, but some of these other processes may take up to a week in this case. And again, this is just the template for the actual workflow. We understand what's going to happen. And then from here on out, all we have to do in order to, say, for example, start one of those changes or actually initiate a change process is either to create a new request for change, have that exist as a form, kind of like the one we saw on the self-service portal for doing that employee onboarding, or the option that I showed you earlier where we have a ticket that we are converting into a change request. The last example I'll show here inside of change management is going to be a bit more of an IT control change. And the example I always like to show for that is showing how we would add new functionality to a tool. So in this case, I'm going to take a look at this new functionality for ERP. In this case, the fields that we're looking at here are going to be slightly different. The description is not the same. John is going to be the person who's making the approval. And then when we take a look at the activities, they're going to be very different. entirely focused on the IT team and their process. But what we could see here is that in this case, there are specific technicians that are receiving notifications and getting assigned tasks as part of this request. Dawn is the person that we go to for all of our reviews. They may be a head of a cab team or something along those lines. And then instead of our planning overview, again, we could see all of those tasks broken out over the course of, in this case, about a week. And this can also include things like scheduling meetings inside of these requests. In this case, this cab meeting is something that could be added to the calendar to say that once we hit this mark, we are going to set up a meeting with all of our cab team members to actually go over this review. However, I know a lot of our customers, for the purposes of reviewing changes, will have, say, a report or dashboard built to show all of the changes that are coming up or set due within a certain time frame for, say, your change advisory board to take a look at all at once whenever they meet. And then when we're taking a look at just our changes as a whole, we have a few different overviews we can use for that. The first is just a report of all of our different changes, all the ones that are in flight now. The ones that you're seeing in my environment in red are past due. It's a lot of historical records in my environment. However, I always like to take a look at both our change planner, which shows things on a bit more of a calendar overview. So understand, hey, we have a lot of different changes going on. What does it look like over the course of the next month, year, in this case, multiple years? As well as the option to use our Change Explorer, where you can filter out different types of changes and try to find specific requests or build overviews for you to take a look at when you're actually working through multiple changes.
Paige, Kenneth asked what the workflow would look like from the technician's perspective. Can you share something like that?
Do you mind me asking for maybe an example just to see what it looks like to actually work through a change?
I think you kind of answered it in this last part. When we first rolled out TOPdesk, we were using tasks, and it became yet another thing to check. It wasn't integrated. We're used to using just the tickets.
Yeah.
So if we were to use this functionality, and I know you can put links and whatnot on your main page, your homepage, what would it look like? For example, you had HR in there. They had this task. Where would they go to find it? What would it look like? How would they organize it? And again, I think you showed it a little bit here in the end.
Yes, I showed a couple of the overviews. The main one that I will speak to is going to be here in our task board. If it's okay, I was going to focus a little bit on reporting as its own topic towards the end of our the presentation. I can show that example in just a minute if that would be okay.
Yep.
Perfect. The last thing I wanted to show here while we're closing out change management is just an example of our change calendar. Again, another overview where you could see changes that are upcoming on a bit of a calendar. In this case, I only have one for this month, but if I look back through, say, my historical request, we can see when changes are occurring. In this case, it is when an employee startup, in this case, is going to need to be completed. So we have an understanding of, hey, what's going on in the team? What kind of changes are we looking at? And when we actually open up a change record as an operator, this is what it's going to look like. So we have a lot of visual consistency between this and incident management. It looks very similar. A couple of key differences that you'll note is, of course, the option to take a look at the planner to see the activities that are a part of the change. But what we're looking at now is just a bit of a conversation between John and Diane, who are working on this particular change. Same thing goes with all of the ability to communicate via email, get notifications based on someone, say, responding back in an email or on the portal when a change is updated. And if I take a look at the planner, I can kind of get an idea of where we're at in the process. In this case, it looks like we've just opened the change. None of the tasks have been completed. And if I was looking at this as an operator, this would be a huge red flag. None of the work's been done. Things need to be addressed. And it gives you a little bit of an idea as to what is going on with this particular change request, as well as being able to review all of the remaining activities that need to be done. When this gets assigned to an operator, they will get a notification for the specific task, whatever they have been assigned, unless they are the person who is, of course, managing the entirety of the change. In this case, Diane is our systems administrator. She can see the total change, but say, for example, HR, if they're only going to be, say, creating that employee onboarding document or filling out the paperwork for them on the first day, they would just get a notification to do that piece. So they mark that complete, it kicks off the next part of the process to the next person in line. And in the same way that you can create changes from tickets, the same is true vice versa. So in this case, if I'm working on a change, and as I'm going through the process, I'm following the workflow that we've set up, we can actually go in, and if we incur a problem, we notice something that's out of the ordinary, we can actually create a ticket request that's related back to the change. And we have the option for us to link different records to our change requests. So in the same way that we could say link maybe an asset in TOPdesk to a ticket, same can be done for a change, where I can link a ticket to a change, I can link assets, specific persons, sites, anything that's going to be relevant for us to make decisions, understand what's going on as part of this change request, and ultimately have this for reporting purposes as well, to say if we made a change against an asset, well, first, we're going to be able to see that inside of the asset history, which I'll show in just a moment when we talk about asset management, but also as part of the change, be able to see how many assets was it related to and being able to pull that in reporting as well. And while we're on the subject of asset management, I would love to move over to that portion of the tool. And the way that I usually like to show that is, I know that I've jumped around a little bit here in the demonstration, but what I'd like to show is first some examples of how we can relate an asset back to, say, a ticket record. In this case, if John's having an issue with a printer, maybe I want to reference that specific printer. Either I could find that from his person record inside TOPdesk, or if you have, say, asset IDs that they can reference, or just seeing based on assignment what John has. In this case, this printer is in his office. And what I can do here is, of course, see ticket history. This could also be referencing our change requests. So in this case, if there were changes that we have against the asset, we can see that on the actual asset record. But this is just showing us all the service requests or tickets in this case. We can, of course, go to the asset card. But one thing I did want to note is that we do have the ability to integrate TOPdesk with a variety of different solutions. The one that I always like to highlight when we're looking at this here is going to be things like TeamViewer, or I know the example I always like to show is Beyond Trust for remote access. So being able to connect to someone's machine, help them with troubleshooting tips, be on in person live with them on their machine. And we can actually use TOPdesk integrated with one of those solutions to kick off those requests directly from the tool. Essentially just adds another option here in the menu to create a remote session option. And that is something, if you have been curious about in TOPdesk, is something that is capable in the tool. But for the purposes of our demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and hop directly to this asset record. And this is just going to start us on a little bit of a dive into asset management. So what we're going to take a look at here is just how are we actually using this record to, how are we using TOPdesk to manage our assets? And most importantly, we take the perspective of focusing on asset management from the perspective of service delivery. So in this case, how are we using this asset record to provide better service to our users or have an understanding of the service we've already provided? First way that we try to help with that is through things like assignment, being able to take an asset, assign it to a user, and then, of course, have customizable fields for all of the information that's important for you to collect around the asset, things like important purchase dates, serial numbers, as well as user-defined fields. Like in this case, I have several fields for things like size, weight, commission date, manufacturer. These field sets can be broken out into different topics. In this case, I have a financial field, a field set data section, and then, of course, an option for us to see things like history on the record. This will show every time a ticket's been logged against a particular asset, it's been assigned to another person, there's been a reservation made against the asset, as I showed on the reservation piece on the portal. But also things like linking documentation, setting up relationships to other assets, as well as linking to external web content. I've seen users use this from everything from setting up barcoding solutions all the way up through things like linking service manuals on vendor websites, or even just having a direct link to the manufacturer if I ever needed to, say, log a service request. We also have a graphical overview, so we could see how our assets are related to one another. In this case, this asset's just assigned to John and it lives in his office. But if this was something a little bit more extensive, I'll show another example here in just a moment. We'd be able to see how this printer is related to other items in our environment. And then if we open our design mode, we could see how we would, say, make some changes to some of those fields. In this case, maybe if I wanted to remove a few of these extraneous fields, it's just as simple as clicking a selection, removing those items, and it will be removed from the entirety of this assets template. And each of these customized fields can be reported on in TOPdesk. So if you needed to say, pull a report of all of the items with a specific purchase date, or maybe you want to set a date, one example that I'll use is for the purposes of life cycle tracking, understanding when something's warranty date is coming up to end, or understanding if there's reminder dates that we need to set inside of the asset to get a notification to say, hey, this is 2 or 3 months out from when the warranty goes up due. We might want to take a look at maybe either replacing the asset or reaching out to the manufacturer to extend a warranty. And really the goal here is to allow you to have an understanding of what's going on with all of your assets. How is it interacting with the rest of the different records you record in TOPdesk? And then, of course, how do we actually use this information? If we have an understanding of when we purchase things, when they're going to go out of warranty, and when we'd like to replace them, we could make sound financial decisions around when we change things in our infrastructure, when we actually replace some of our older assets, as well as doing things like some maybe root cause analysis to understand when, if we have 100 tickets around the same printer, might be time for us to take a look at why that's happening. Is it because John logged 100 tickets because he doesn't know how to use it? Or is it because there's something wrong with that particular asset? And I'm just going to close out a few of the extraneous tabs I have here. One thing I just always like to provide as a reminder is that, as you see, TOPdesk doesn't ever open up additional browser tabs. It keeps it a little bit easier for you to navigate through the tool. But if we were to take a look at asset management and start to look through some of the overviews we have, the first one I'd like to start with is this asset overview. Again, just a general long list of all of the assets you have in your organization. You can create some filtered views. So in this case, I could see everything that we have logged into the tool, but I can also filter this based on our asset types. So things like, maybe I want to look at the applications. So things like software licensing in TOPdesk, as well as maybe our laptops, and I'll even use a server as an example. All those custom fields that we were talking about on the asset record can be added as columns in these overviews. So if you need to be able to have a standard view that shows things like when the deployment date, the date that something was purchased, maybe if we want to filter things based on something as simple as the brand that they're being purchased from, we'd be able to pull those overviews here on the asset overview, as well as saving them as custom reports in TOPdesk. And if I were to go to this asset, we'd be able to see, of course, how it differs from the printer. But the main reason I like to show this example is because it has a few links to other assets. So we could see how this is related to not only different assets in our environment, but in this case, it's even related to a specific SLA, meaning that when this server incurs an incident, we have an agreement among the organization that this is going to get priority service. And we could see how that interacts with the rest of our environment here in the overview, just a little bit better of an example than that printer. And one of the most recent updates that we've made inside of asset management is the ability to better manage stock. So if you ever have any items in that you manage that maybe they don't always go out into deployment, some of them may live in somewhere like we'll just say maybe an IT closet or a warehouse or just a storage facility in some form. One way we can help to manage those stock items, those in some cases consumables that you'll have, is to designate where they're going to live. In this case, I'm going to look at this IT storage closet. And what this is showing me is that inside of this closet, there are 17 items broken out between things like laptops that we have ready to deploy, consumable cables that we may want to have a general idea of how many we have in stock if we need to order more. but ultimately we're not tracking those items. We're just removing them from an overall count. And I've even seen examples of how we can help with setting up some automation inside of TOPdesk so that when, for example, you do need to give someone a cable, we can make that part of a change process and ensure that in this case, if we have 10 in stock, when someone receives one, we can make sure that the stock is updated to say we only have 9 left, for example. And another quick overview for those more consumable items or the stock that you store is just all of the different items that we have, the number of places that we have a stock of that item, and then the total number we have in stock. And a lot of times I see customers use this to keep track of, most importantly, the assets that we have in reserve ready to deploy. And if we ever needed to, for example, deploy one of those laptops, all I would need to do is go to those assets, find a location that they're in. I could select that asset and then assign it to a person, unlink it from a stock, and then we know that our stock totals have been updated and that the asset has been assigned to the correct person. And all of those different tasks, linking and unlinking it from the stock, assigning it to a new person or location, all gets recorded in the history section of the asset. Asset management is one of the functions in TOPdesk that has been getting a lot of the most recent development updates. There's a lot of information we've posted in the last few weeks in the form of things like webinars, notifications that we've sent out with some documentation around asset management, some of the changes we've made there. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you have on the asset side if there are any now.
Paige, there are 2 questions that popped up in the chat. Jason asked, who generally creates, going back to change management, who generally creates the change management templates and logic, et cetera? Is it like usually the HR, IT, facilities? Am I asking that correctly, Jason?
Yeah, I think the question really comes down to ownership of those types of things. Is that who has the authority to create new templates and create those workflows, and what permissions, do we really need to be thinking of in terms of, typically does each division have a named person who's authorized to make those things for that team? And how do customers typically facilitate that cross-departmental collaboration to make sure that those processes, those change management processes are adopted and followed by all the people that are involved in that overall process?
That's a great question. I'm happy to speak to that. So when it does vary from customer to customer. The most common way that I'll see that our customers will use change management or have some of that ownership over who builds the process is either having the IT admin or the main systems admin be the person who is responsible for keeping everything running, but a lot of times they will designate the task of building out those change templates to either a specific individual on each team that's building changes if they want them to have the flexibility to say, hey, we have this tool, we trust that you know how to, after some training, of course, have the ability to create these change templates, and we're here to help along the way. The other option is that they decide to say that there is someone who focuses entirely on building out changes. They'll work with our consultancy team as part of the implementation of those modules or as part of the project that we've been talking about with Tracy to get you some extra help from consultancy. We would help with building the processes out, and then it's really the ownership is on whoever you believe should be in charge of setting up those changes, making sure that they're being followed by the team, and then when it comes to the second part there, actually making sure that people follow the process. Really, that is, like I said, more of a process question, but we typically see that someone is usually in charge of building out your change requests, either as a central person on the IT side, or we'll have individuals on each team that help with building out changes, or some combination of the two. Hope that answers the question.
Kenneth, did you want to ask your questions while we're at this point?
Sure. I'm forgetting what okay, so in the asset template design view, I'm not going to say I've done this before. I've done this before. It's really easy to accidentally delete a section because you see I'll highlight something and then I'll click the trash can. I did it once. I didn't make that mistake again. but there was no warning. It was just gone. So it's the different sections within the viewer, or
Gotcha.
what the term was. Is there something that we can turn on that stops you from making that mistake, or at least gives you a warning? That's question one.
That's a great question. I know that there are areas inside of change management, for example, that will give you a little bit of a warning when you're about to, say submit a request or mark something as complete. I'm not exactly sure if that's possible inside of asset management, but that's another one I could take a note on for consultancy if that would be all right.
Sure. And then the second question was when you were talking about in stock, and I may have missed this. We have software licenses. It would be nice to know ahead of time when we were getting low so we could purchase more licenses. So how exactly does that work? And again, I may have missed it when you were demoing it, but how do you start that? And how do you manage that?
So essentially having a bit of a safety stock. So once we get below, say 10 items in stock, we need to have a request to order more.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm happy to show a quick example there. The specific function for it to say create a notification once the stock for an item gets low is something that is coming through our through our development team. It's not quite there yet, but you do have the ability to set a safety stock quantity, for example. So if I would use this application, I don't have any assets in stock now. One moment. So we go here. So essentially what we would likely do is inside of the asset record for, say for this laptop, we could have a section field here that would essentially reference a safety stock count. Actually, the cable example that I have in that IT storage closet is a great example. So here I have it is very simple for consumable items, which is I'm saying that, hey, for the safety stock, we need to have 10 in stock. If we get below 10, we need to order more. Same thing can be done for some of those more named assets, but the functionality for it to be able to send you a notification when you dip below a certain safety stock total is something that is coming. It's not quite there yet, but it's on the way. Just taking a quick peek to the time. I know that we have right around 20 minutes left. I'd love to take some time to go over just briefly our operations management and a little bit about reporting. But if there is something else we'd rather spend that last 20 minutes taking a look at, I'm happy to pivot a little bit if there are any other questions. I will go ahead. Perfect. I will go ahead and move over to talking a little bit about operations. So when we're talking about operations management, this is the portion of the tool focused on things like preventative maintenance activities, scheduled tasks, or what I like to always say is anything that you would put in your calendar, set to recurring, and then forget a couple of weeks down the line. That can all be scheduled into TOPdesk through operations management. And the way that that's done is through a series of what we call operational activities. And this is a portion of the tool that I do typically see not only being used by the IT department, but also several other teams, most often things like facilities, maintenance, or any other teams that say survey your campuses to do things like fire alarm checks, making sure that all of the fire extinguishers in the building work. On the IT side, I see this being used for things like system updates, as well as things like backups, going in and doing reviews of system infrastructure. And also the reporting that we pull out of the operations side can be used for things like auditing. Being able to say that, hey, we said that we would go in and perform security reviews every month or every 6 months, whatever the time frame would be. That has been done. We have recorded it being completed. And if, say, a state auditor were to come in, you'd be able to have records related to that. And I see that being used by customers all the time. But if we wanted to, say, create an operational activity, all we would need to do is define the activity, set some categorization steps, plan a start date for this task. So in this case, if I were to do a server 1, I could define what the actual task is. I can actually even provide a list of what needs to be done, or a bit of a step-by-step guide here if I'd like. I see customers use that all the time. Define the fields that we need to. I'm just going to select a few at random here for a moment. Set our planned start date. So in this case, we're going to say that this has already been done this month. Maybe I'll start at the beginning of July. I'll give myself maybe about a week to do it. I could set an operator group for who's going to be assigned the task. In this case, I'll say it's IT services. And then I can also select a specific operator. Again, very similar to incident management. The big difference you'll notice is that once I hit save for this request, so it's a little later than that. It's going to give me the option to make this recurrent. So what I can do here is I can make this into a series so that in this case, maybe every month on, I'll say the first Monday of each month, our IT services team is going to have a task on the calendar to go in, do an update on this server, and that can continue until the end of time. It can happen for maybe a short stint if there's something like a specific project or focus that you have for that certain time frame. And then we also have the ability to take each of these series, the recurrence of an activity, and group them together into what we call schemas. And what I mean by that is just being able to say that we have a larger task at hand. In this case, maybe it's grounds maintenance is the example I use on the facility side. That may include multiple different series that need to be done, need to be reported on, and then I'd be able to see each of the individual operational activities that are coming up or have happened in the past. And then in the same way that we'd be able to see this in change management, we have the ability to see a calendar overview of all of our operational activities. Understanding when things need to be done, due dates. In this case, a lot of these tasks are well past due. We can also take a look at what I like to call a bit of a checklist. So here we could take a look and see all of the different tasks we need to complete. And in this case, what we're going to do is say that there are a bunch of tasks that need to be done. I'm the person responsible for it this week. I just want to have a list that I could go from server to server, taking a look at each item that needs to be completed, have a little bit of an understanding of what needs to be done if there are additional tasks that need to be completed. In this case, it's just a backup, so we know what to do. But every time one of these tasks is completed, all I do is check it off of a checklist, mark that I may have skipped it if that is what I actually did instead, or even mark that there was an anomaly. In this case, I could define maybe a reason why it wasn't completed or something that was out of the expectation, something we didn't expect to occur when we were trying to go out and complete this activity. And again, from this activity record, I can make a ticket. If, for example, I'm doing a backup, I notice something's wrong, I open up this activity, I create a ticket, and now those two records are linked together. Operations management is a bit of it is a see what you get kind of tool. So the functionality is robust but relatively easy to explain. Don't have a lot more to show on the operations side today. But if there are questions about how you could better use this this function, this is something again that we could tackle with the consultant. And then the last thing I wanted to mention while we're talking about just general functionality in the tool is around reporting. And to the question earlier about where are people going to see these tasks when they're completing their work, the first place I always point to is the task board. And in addition to being able to see things like our tickets that have been assigned to myself, maybe the groups that I'm a part of, or even the tickets that are not yet assigned to a team or a group, I could filter these. In this case, I just want to see all the tickets that I own as a technician. And I like to call this my come in the morning and get to work report. I see all the tasks that are assigned to me, all of the due dates. I can filter this to say maybe the stuff that needs to be done today, tomorrow, or in this case, everything that's overdue. And if I don't want to focus on tickets today, or if I want to be able to say, keep track of both the change activities and the tickets I see, I can just select those items from the task overview. And in the same place to see all my tickets, I could see when there's a change activity that I need to complete. In this case, I need to go make an expense payment. And if I click here, Same as the ticket record, I am taken directly to the change. I could see what's expected of me. In this case, there's not a lot of instruction included on this activity, but I could get to work, add any notes, mark this complete, and kick it off to the next person in line. Some of the other overviews I'd like to highlight are going to be the plan board. This is a little bit more of a managerial overview, so the ability to see things like the, for a specific team, I'm going to take a look at our, I'll just take a look at our IT services group. I could see all of our operators. I could see the shifts that they're working based on their schedule. So things like, are they working front office, back office? The shift information is something that's optional, but the value I typically see getting out of this tool, part of the tool, is being able to see for an operator all the tickets that are assigned to them currently. So I could see that Alan has about 4 requests in his name that need to be completed. If I, as a manager, see that he's going to be out for a couple of days or maybe out for a week, maybe he got sick, if I need to assign this to a new person, all I need to do is drag and drop some of these tickets over to someone else's name. So that if Alan's going to be out for a while, maybe I'll give all of the rest of the work that he has to Angela. Quick and easy, have a quick idea of what's going on, can make those changes on the fly and then move along. And then the last of the standard overviews I like to show is typically our Kanban board. So this is just a bit of a great way to focus your task, especially if you do things like morning stand-up or work in a bit of an agile workflow way of working. We could see all of our tickets broken out by status on a few different columns. So in this case, what's our priority, what's to do, what's in progress, about to go live, or closed out. Again, this is another place that I can make reassignments if I'm taking an overview in a morning with a customer. Or I can even make adjustments to say that, for example, based on that status mapping, maybe I want to change your focus. So maybe the to-dos for this week are going to be all the tickets that are waiting on a response for a customer. Maybe we're on the phones this week, calling people, trying to get updates, trying to know what's going on. Hey, we have a lot of tickets open and not a lot of responses. We need to change that. In which case you'll see some adjustments being made and be able to change those overviews. And this is something that can be looked at with the rest of the team. But these are just some of the ways that we help with some of the out-of-the-box function. When it comes to the rest of the reporting at TOPdesk, a lot of that is done through the custom reporting in the tool. Not too sure what the extent of the knowledge is or the experience you've had with building reports in TOPdesk is, but what I'd like to show is just an example of some general dashboards. And here we're looking at some reports I've built related directly to ticketing. However, we also have the option to build reports for all of the other modules that we see in the tool. So change management, asset management, as well as some of these other modules, including operations management that you may not currently be using in your environment. And with any custom report you're building in TOPdesk, especially around tickets, it's going to be a quick 5-step process that has we have a bit of a wizard that walks you through the process of building a report. I won't walk through all the steps of building a report with you today, as that's something that we'll likely want to go through in a bit more detail with a consultant. But ultimately, if I build out this report, wanted to see overviews of things like the number of tickets completed by a specific technician, tickets logged by some certain groups of end users, or even a situation where maybe I just need to have an understanding of how many tickets is the team closing over the course of a week, a month, or a year, and being able to report that to, say, upper management, or have a bit of an overview for someone, say, like Tracy, who's a bit of an oversight over all of the colleges, being able to have that understanding of what's going on with our team, how many tickets are we processing. Same thing goes for assets and change records as well. And these reports can be scheduled so that if they need to be pulled on a recurring basis, need to be sent out to certain people on the team, that can be automated as well. And the last thing I'll mention on the reporting side is we do also have the ability to integrate with a variety of external reporting tools. The most common examples I think of are going to be Power BI and Tableau. If you ever need to pull information out of the tool and want to see it compared to other records and other tools that you use, or just want to be able to dig a little bit deeper into the data, it is possible, and we have some documentation as to how you're even able to set that integration up yourself without any assistance from consultancy. that does bring me to the end of the functional side of the conversation, taking a look at some of the different modules in the tool. I know that when we start to talk about how we can help with consultancy to improve the way that you're working in TOPdesk, or to take a bit of a deeper dive into the individual modules, I will have one of our systems consultants online with us to, of course, schedule time with you and have a real deep dive into how you're using the tool and how we can continue to improve. But I'm happy to answer any questions based on what we looked at here today.
I just have just sort of an observation about our culture
Of course.
here at OU. We're a small enough campus that folks know one another pretty well.
Mhm.
They know who the key people are who can solve their problem, and everybody's problem is a top priority in their own mind. In some cases that's true, in some cases it's not. But we struggle at times with getting everyone to participate in the ticketing system.
Mhm.
People gravitate towards picking up the phone and giving you a direct call. All of that work that's done in the course of taking a direct call or resolving that, as an in-person sort of resolution doesn't get captured by this system very well.
Mhm.
And the time necessary to go back after an incident or after a resolution and create a ticket just for the logging of that information is just not something that we are able to do practically. And so for some of the reporting, that's a challenge for me, is the reliability of the reporting to sort of articulate how much a technician is doing in terms of
Mhm.
volume of calls and volume of support is difficult in our environment. I'm just wondering if you have a sense of ways that other institutions like ours can sort of mitigate that lack of transparency, lack of information when it comes to reporting and accountability back to those KPI reports.
Gotcha. So essentially, we do a lot throughout the course of our day, and not all of it actually makes its way into the tool because of having to take phone calls, having to be stopped in, say, the hallway, things along those lines, and just trying to find some ways to either get that information into the tool more clearly, or being able to provide additional justifications of like, hey, I know it only looks like we have so many tickets in the tool, but we actually do a whole lot more outside of it. My first answer to that is our general recommendation is to take all the steps that we can help with to push people towards things like the self-service portal, as well as some tools inside of TOPdesk to help with receiving things like phone calls. With the phone call example, I'll mention is that, of course, there are going to be instances where someone, say, stops you while you're not near your computer or near a place to be able to log a ticket in TOPdesk. But we also provide the caller card. So the ability for us to, while you're on the phone with someone, just as easily as entering in their name, maybe entering a note while you're talking to them, seeing their history, so all the tickets that they've logged so far, and to see if there's something maybe you could update with just a couple of quick notes, or even create a new ticket. I know that does require the actual process of going through and fulfilling a ticket, actually entering the information. But our general recommendation is just to try to use some of those functions to provide more options for you to actually log the ticket to the tool. The same thing with those quick tickets. But when it comes to some of that best practice support, being able to say, hey, we need to be able to find ways to get users to adopt the self-service portal more, or ways to help with making sure that all of the records that we record get into TOPdesk, that is something we can provide through consultancy, as they're a little bit more familiar with some of the other ways that users have done that for us in the past, since that's essentially their whole role.
Well, thank you.
No problem. I'll definitely make a note to have that in mind for the OWU team, just so that when we start to take a look at the environment with consultancy, that's something that we're keeping in front of mind.
Kenneth, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to preface this question or comment with a little background. When we deployed TOPdesk, there were individuals that were involved in that process that, for the most part, are not here. Now, Harrison actually was one of them, and he's back. The problems that we've had are surrounded by ignorance in what it can do, how it works. And I have to just say that just sitting in on this session with you has been very valuable. Just saying, oh, that fixes that problem. But here's my question.
Mhm.
Anytime I look for answers to issues that I'm experiencing, I feel like I'm locked out of a walled garden. I don't have access to log into TOPdesk knowledge base articles. And we're talking about the whole shift left, which
Mhm.
I'm actually working on that myself. I'm wondering what I'm missing or how I can find answers to a lot of this. I mentioned the operational activities. That's really cool. I know of them, but I'd like to know more about it and maybe how we set it up. The color card, I stumbled across that once. I've stumbled across all these little things, but just a general overview of training. And I know there are modules that happen,
Mhm.
but is there, I'm a reader, so I love to go find it and just get the answer and then move on and then build out articles. So I'd love to see a solution that kind of addresses that part of it, not being locked out of it because there's, one or two people that can get to it. The message sometimes gets scrambled when it goes from me to the technician to TOPdesk. So I don't know if that's a comment or a question, but that's kind of been my frustration with, and I love TOPdesk. It's just, I know that there are things I don't know.
Gotcha. So essentially just easier access to like training materials, documentation. How does this tool actually function? I'm happy to help with that. I know that particular question, how we feel like that there is a lot of functionality available, but we're not fully utilizing it is kind of what sparked the conversation now, to be honest. At least it seems like, in the sense that we want to make sure that if you're using the tool, you're getting as much out of it as possible. And that's something we can help with through consultancy. But another resource that I always like to point to is that we do have a wealth of information through our own internal support portal. If you don't already have access to that now, I'd be happy to help with getting you access. I do know that typically that who has access to my TOPdesk or top help is determined by your team. So if I will preface this a little bit on my end in saying that as long as the administrator on your side is okay with having you having access to that information, we typically recommend having multiple people on the team have access to the support portal in TOPdesk so that you can check out our knowledge items, our system documentation, as well as some manuals that we have available. We also have a lot of just basic operator training and administrator training videos available online that I can send some links over to after this call. We have a lot of resources available, but I do know that some of the things I've heard from customers is that sometimes people just don't know where to look. And I'm happy to help point you in the right direction with those.
And to tag on to that, kind of that's one of the concerns across all five or all four of the colleges, is that sometimes those knowledge resources are only available to certain roles or permissions that are set within the system. And I think that's a common, a common issue across all of the schools. And we're working on trying to figure out how to get past that. If maybe we can just, change some of the role permissions or things like that that would allow everyone to have access to certain resources and knowledge-based things. So that is something that's on our radar.
Gotcha. Yeah, on our side, at least just from my knowledge, is that typically we recommend having multiple people having access to all of our knowledge resources through the support portal and things like that. So typically, restricting access to those resources is something that's made as a process decision on the customer side. Essentially what I'm saying is that if you feel comfortable with having multiple people have access to that portal, the ability to log tickets with us directly, or even just accessing knowledge items, we are happy to give them that access. It's really just dependent on what your team feels comfortable with on a college by college basis.
I want to cut in and say, Kenneth, you should have certain access because I created an account for you. I don't know how far you can get, but you should have access.
I've tried not very far, but you and I can look at that
Yeah.
later.
Okay. All right.
Any other closing questions? I know we're right at time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's afternoon. But of course, we're going to continue the conversation and try to get the meetings that Tracy had mentioned set up as soon as we can in July to start taking a bit of a deep dive with a consultant into your environments. But anything else I can help with today, I'm happy to act as a resource.
If you do think of something, please feel free to reach out. If you have something between now and the time that we're reviewing your system, be more than happy to to field those questions.
Before we
last-
go, oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I just wanted to
No,
say,
go right ahead.
Jason, before we go, I wanted to get some information from you so we could speak offline. That was for Jason.
And I think it might be helpful just for our Ohio 5 group to know we are in Clint Baker's absence, we are working to put together a TOPdesk community group or peer group to be able to have these conversations and maybe figure some things out, bounce, like you guys were saying, sometimes it's good to hear what other campuses are doing or how are you handling this problem. We're working on getting those groups formed so that you can have regular conversations and things if that's something that would be helpful.
Yeah.
I'm
Got
gonna
it.
stop the recording here real quick.